Hey guys, it is Sugar and Jeff.
Hello.
We are back to do our other half of our top 10 movies that are in anime. Wow, that was so hard for me to say.
Top 10 anime movies.
I said that like all backwards. Oh god. Okay. So we finished with your number 5.
Yes.
So I'll go into my number 5. I don't know if this is on your list. I don't know. But mine would be Cowboy Bebop the movie.
It hits an honorable mention for me just because, while yes, it is a film, I feel more like it should have just been 3 episodes of the anime. And even the creators have said basically they were like, this actually fits chronologically in between, I think it's episodes 21 and 22. And they said if they'd had more episodes, they just would have fit it in.
Right.
So, while it is technically a movie in the same way that I feel it's a movie in the same way Digimon Adventure Tri are technically movies.
Right.
But I wouldn't consider it I don't consider it really in my list.
Okay.
Though it is phenomenal.
So I don't think I have to say much about it because I feel like we've explained what Cowboy Bebop is already in other podcasts, and I think anybody who hasn't lived under a rock knows what Cowboy Bebop is. But very quickly, it's kind of like a space western, and it's kind of like they stand by of what people recommend for you to watch initially because it's rather good. I shouldn't say rather good. It's really good. And the movie itself, I really like, especially the character of Vincent, which we haven't really gotten to know through the series. And the thing I actually enjoyed most, and the thing that sticks in my mind most, isn't so much even the story, it's just the choreography. And that sounds so, like, weird and, like,
fight
silly.
Choreography, yeah.
But, like, especially between Spike and Vincent in the train, and, like, when we're fighting later on, when they have, like, you can see the different fighting styles and the amount of choreography put into just those scenes. And I just love that. And it's very, like, I can't think of a lot of shows, honestly. Like, I know people have had countdowns and other stuff about it, but honestly, there's very few movies or even anime series that comes to mind where it's, like, consistently good choreography. And especially in the series itself and in the movie, I find the movie goes even beyond what the series was showing for, you know, a fight scene. In the sense of hand combat. I don't mean like pew pew gun pew pew. But in hand-to-hand combat, which is something that I really appreciate because it shows a level of understanding and the kind of care to want to animate that. I show a lot of respect for people who want to show how to go through the motions, how somebody would counter an attack and defend themselves in 2 different fighting styles, but understanding one another sort of thing. But yeah, in a way, I could understand your argument of kind of fitting into the anime series itself because it does seem like a longer kind of couple of episodes. But in the sense that I've watched it so many times, it's found that place in my top 10 because it's just so many things working for it rather than against it.
Yeah, it's an honorable mention of mine, mostly just on a technicality issue.
Yeah.
In terms of my just pure enjoyment, I like that a little bit more than some of the lower ranked ones. If I was gonna boot Professor Layton off and then move it in where it belongs, probably right around here.
Okay.
So we would have a similar sort of idea in terms of that. I like that it involves one of I can't say that it's a fault necessarily. Cowboy Bebop, I feel, did they did a very good job in terms of creating one particular villain that really resonated throughout the show, and you could understand some of the it's the similar issue we were talking about earlier where you really need to understand why a villain is a villain, what their goals are, why they have a certain worldview, and I feel they do an exceptionally good job of that with the character of Vincent. I'm not going to spoil anything, but in the way in which the story could have mirrored what Spike went through, but kind of like, two paths diverged in a Yellow Wood, and I, took one over the other. They are very similar characters, but the couple of things that are different about them are showcased exceptionally well. So not only is it great fighting sequences, great choreography, the great music that's always been part of it, but it shows a character who is definitely somebody who you can you can understand the rationalization of what's happening to them, why they would both fight and yet kind of be in agreement with Spike in a lot of ways. But for those who haven't seen the movie yet,
we just try not to spoil it. I know where Jeff's going, but yeah, don't want to give too much away. But I can understand kind of the point of view between Vincent and Spike and so forth.
Yeah, because a lot of the villains, with exception to one in Cowboy Bebop, they're somewhat throwaway. They just kind of exist to be caught or to escape through the failings of the Bebop crew. This is an entirely different style of villain, an entirely different storytelling mechanic. So it's appreciated within the narrative of the series.
Right, and that's why I find like somebody like, how can I say this without giving anything away? Vincent, like you were saying, it's kind of like they're so alike in the sense that they kind of see each other as themselves dead in a way over circumstance. Yeah. Can I say that? That's the best way I can say that without giving anything away. And I find it so interesting to see somebody who is like Spike in a certain extent, and I like that contrast, so to speak. But anyways, I don't want to get too much into it. Really good. Obviously, if you like Bebop, you'll like the movie. I know some people are confused. The movie also goes under the name of Knocking on Heaven's Door. Yes. So don't get confused. So, yeah.
if you happen to be watching the series for the first time, if you want to kind of get the understanding of where it takes place, the creators have said you can literally watch, I think it's between 21 and 22, but I don't know for sure. You can read up on it. And they said, literally, if you watch that episode, then you watch the movie, and then you go to the next episode, they said that's how they feel is the best way to watch Cowboy Bebop as a whole.
I can't remember the exact the exact episodes that it's kind of meant to be spliced between. But either way, you can watch the entire anime, then watch the movie. It'll still make just as much sense, because you have a better understanding of who these characters are, what these new characters kind of mean to their dynamic, and so forth. Anywho, your number 4.
My number 4 is the most recent movie on the list that I've watched. The most recent in terms of release as well. It is the first movie that I put on there that is a 10. Except for, we talked about Perfect Blue before, which I also gave a 10. But Silent Voice.
It's on my list. It's my number 3.
So my number 4, your number 3. Silent Voice, very recent. I think it was last year in terms of its Japanese release. I'm not 100% sure what's happening in terms of any sort of... I don't think it's been dubbed yet.
No.
And I don't know if there are any plans to do it, though they should, because this is an exceptionally powerful and important movie for everybody.
Right.
As we've mentioned before, both Sugar and I are teachers. That's our profession. So anything that can kind of hit the vein of kids and the ability to teach a lesson will have a little bit more of an effect on us than maybe the majority of the population. That being said...
I was about to say, basically the premise is about a girl who is deaf and a boy who teases her to the point where she leaves school. And then he himself is ostracized and bullied for the fact of what he has done. That's the most I want to tell you. Nothing spoiler-wise, just kind of the basic premise of the show. Sorry, you can continue. I just wanted to make that clear before we get into it, in case somebody hadn't heard. But I did also make a video on that as well. But
yeah, so Sugar can link you to that. It's a very powerful movie, and I like how it shows the effects that teasing and the actions of just one person, like how deep that impact can be for good and bad, and how long-reaching that can be even at a young age.
Right.
That's one of the things where sometimes we have a tendency, especially as adults, and we think back to things that may have impacted us as kids, and we're like, wow, that was really stupid for me to be so worried about that. And adults have the tendency sometimes to look at teenagers and preteens, and we'll trivialize the problems that they feel like they're facing. And this movie does an exceptionally good job of showing the effects and the impact that simple teasing can have.
Not even teasing, full-on bullying. Like,
yeah, teasing and
Jeff
bullying.
saw me full-on, like, bawl during the first watching of the show because, like, I was bullied in school, and there's so many, I know a bunch of people can relate to this. It really hits a core with you of, like, this immense loneliness and this immense kind of pain that this person causes you, and you don't know how to what to do about it. And I find it's a really great moment in the show where I burst into tears, of course, where you kind of understand it's not so much, how can I explain it? It's, you start understanding that it is about, bullying and so forth, but the impact it has on the self, that when you start perpetuating this hate, like the moment where the main character is like, maybe choked up now, or one of the main character there, where she says, like, I hate myself. And it just made me, sort of made me tear up.
It's, as you can tell, it's very powerful. It's one of those movies that, I would...
Whew, I'm better.
I would, as a teacher, I would show it as young as even maybe 9 and 10-year-olds, because I think they would get the point.
They'd understand that, the fact of, maybe somebody's teased somebody about something that they thought was insignificant, but it really means something to someone else, or the fact of, like, how bullying affects others and what it can do to their outside. It's not just at school, how it affects their outside life, their friendships, their family dynamic, and it just affects so many things, and the fact of how it hurts people genuinely. And kind of, I love the fact of the show, just kind of understanding and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and realizing how much hurt you can cause somebody.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, the attempts at no, I won't say that, because I don't want to
I was about to say, I know exactly what you're saying. Don't say it.
Let's just say...
It's wonderful. It's beautiful. There's moments it's going to make
crushing.
You weep. You will, honest to goodness, weep. There's nobody I have met yet. There's a couple of people who are like, it kind of choked me up, but I was okay. But I find especially people who had that experience of being bullied and so forth, you will just weep because it's just so raw and it's so honest and it's very...
The less you know about it, the better.
Yes.
Going in.
Yes, I don't even want to explain very much more.
I had made the mistake. I was watching an AMV that literally was
huge.
just...
I was so angry.
It was labeled just as multiple anime,
and
they showed a critical moment in the anime, and Sugar, like...
I lost my shit.
I think she would have hit me if she was that kind of person.
I was about to say, I don't hit him. I'm glad you added that.
If you were that kind of person, you would have just given me a little smack.
I was about to say, I'm glad you added that little ending there, because I was like, I would never.
I can't believe anybody would put that in a multiple anime AMV.
In case you are a YouTuber happening to listen to this, for the love of God, do not put spoilers in the title, in the thumbnail, or just in general in like anything that's kind of for enjoyment, because it's not fair that you spoil things. Like, I'm not going to say who, there's somebody on YouTube who does like manga stuff, and every damn week it comes on my feed about spoilers in the upcoming chapters of stuff I'm waiting to read. It makes me really pissed off.
So yeah.
That's off on a tangent, but let's keep that in mind.
Like this movie, more than any of them that I have on my list, it does lose a little bit of a punch if you know what's going to happen.
That's why I don't want to explain any other events that happen in it. You kind of understand this journey between two people, and it's very, very lovely. There's lots of symbolism. There's lots of, what are they called? Pillow shots. It's beautiful. It's lovely. Fine lines, fragile, like, characters, beautiful pastel colors.
I gave it a 10.
I can't give it enough love because it's so bloody good.
My number 4, your number 3.
It was my number 3. My number 4, and I'm certain yours is higher, is Grave of the Fireflies. Your number 1.
Absolutely.
I figured.
Without a doubt.
I figured. Grave of the Fireflies, if you haven't seen it, there's several reasons why you can love it. From my perspective, I am a history major, so I love this whole storytelling of, lots of stories and lots of histories told by the winner, whereas Grave of the Fireflies is about the Second World War and about those people who suffered from those who quote-unquote won history. And it gives a very sweet dynamic of two boys, two brothers, and how... brother and sister. I say boys because I was just thinking of something else at the time. 2 siblings, 1 boy, 1 girl. Sorry, I was just thinking of that haircut. I was just, for some reason in my mind, I placed it as a boy and a girl, and kind of the dynamic of, you know, what it means to lose not just everything, but the simple things, and kind of making compromise when you should make compromise, what family means. It shows the darker side of war, and I think you're already thinking, well, I already know the dark side of war, but you haven't seen it. Mm-hmm. If you watch Grave of the Fireflies, even the opening scene, I was already tearing up, and it's such a very raw movie, and it's one of the ones where it's like you don't have to understand it on a personal level, but understand it on another person's spectrum of pain, and understanding how much suffering that would be in that situation. Like, I don't want to give too much away because it's such a good story. It's so well written. The animation is okay for its time. It's not like the best you've ever seen. It's very simplistic, but it's very well done. Like, anybody who's critiqued it is given it like the most amount of praise you can get. It's very hard to rewatch. It's kind of like Schindler's List in that way, where it's like, it's a wonderful watch. I wouldn't want to watch it too many times more because it's so hard to watch, and it made me cry a lot. And it's hard that way. But I find that it's a very good story. It's very honest. It's very true. It's written from a perspective that a lot of people don't hear about in school, in history books in general. And yeah, I'm sure you can add a lot more, seeing as how it's near number one. But yes, that's just my perspective. And sorry I made that mistake with the two brothers. Just that one kid's haircut is always reminds me of a boy.
I come at it from a tiny bit of a different perspective as well, as the story is about an older brother and a younger sister. Mm-hmm. I have that dynamic. I have 3 siblings, but mm-hmm. I am an older brother to a younger sister. Mm-hmm. And so I will go a tiny bit more into the story than you do, just what would kind of be on the back cover, which is just the story takes place around a brother and a sister and how their lives are changed by the carpet bombing of Japan during the Second World War. And so, in short, obviously, it absolutely devastates their lives mm-hmm. because it essentially destroys their home, it destroys their family, it destroys the trust family has in each other. And because everybody is in the same situation, certain people that you expect to maybe, like, you expect somebody to come to the rescue, you know, like something good is going to happen. That wasn't the reality of the Second World War. That mm-hmm. isn't reality of war now. Mm-hmm. And it takes a very staunch, very cold, realistic look mm-hmm. at what is going to happen mm-hmm. to these kids.
Right.
And it is hard to watch. It is...
Especially as an adult, you know yeah. what's going to happen, and you hope to God that it doesn't, but you know it likely will.
Yeah.
And that's even the worst thing in this... Try not to get choked up again. Where it's just seeing some of the shots of like just there's so many shots that do a good job of pacing where it gets to the point of just how traumatic this is and just how devastating these events were. That they weren't like all bad people, as a lot of history books would like to say, where it's like us against them. Where it's a lot of innocent people and people who lost families and lost homes and lost everything. And it's a very hard story.
It's I bring this up to everybody who has never heard of it and who don't understand the power that animation has and whatnot. This has been called the greatest anti-war movie ever by Roger Ebert.
Yeah.
So yes, you can sit here and you can say whatever you want about Roger Ebert, and that mm-hmm. I don't agree with a lot of his synopsises of movies mm-hmm. or his critical evaluation. Somebody as prolific and as well respected as Roger Ebert mm-hmm. in terms of understanding the power of the medium of movies mm-hmm. has called this the best anti-war movie ever created.
Yeah.
I couldn't say I could talk for 10 minutes straight about how fantastic this film is and how important it is. Mm-hmm. And Roger Ebert has probably already said everything that I would want to say in a much better way. It's not just a great anime film.
It's a great story.
It's a great film. It is a powerful film that, regardless of how difficult it is to watch, I've watched
it's necessary.
I've watched it a total of 4 times now, and each time it destroys me.
It destroys.
The very first time I watched it, and when it was done, and I thought about what I would have done in that situation if I had my younger sister to take care of, I openly wept. I wept for 15 minutes. I couldn't stop.
Yeah. I can definitely, 2 parts that got me, I won't give anything away, is the flashback sequence, which killed me. having a sibling or even nieces and nephews, it killed me to watch. And then the tunnel scene. That destroyed me.
Yeah.
And it was so hard. Ugh.
Yeah. It's the kind of movie that I would understand 100% after somebody watched it if they said, I can't watch that again. And that's fine. Some of the best movies that you ever watch, you only watch them once.
That's the thing. I don't know many people who could rewatch Schindler's List. Even for some people, a silent voice. I've rewatched it a couple times now. Each time I'm bawled like a baby. And it's the same with Grave of the Fireflies. But I think each one of these has a very important message. And if it reaches you on that level, it lets you know that it's doing something well.
Yeah. And so that's the reason why it's the number 1 on my list. Some of these movies that I have in my top 10, I talk about how they pushed the medium of anime forward. Mm-hmm. And that they gave it some legitimacy. They gave it something that a general audience had never, they hadn't anticipated that, anime could do this. Right. Anime could do that. This is one of the few movies, probably the only anime movie that I would ever say it eclipses its genre. It is that important. I would put it with Schindler's List.
Yes, absolutely. Just because it's animated doesn't take away from the fact that it is so well written. It is so precise. It's so honest. It just touches on all the things that you need to be aware of. Especially if you're somebody who understands and appreciates history, you have to understand the perspective of somebody else. And I find that's another thing of why Silent Voice and them kind of ride close to one another, is that both have a very specific message. And I find that it's done concisely and to the point, and that you understand it. And there's no questioning what could have been taken from the movie. It's exactly what it is.
And if you've never heard of Grave of the Fireflies and you look up some information, you are going to see, I don't know if it's a Studio Ghibli film. I don't know if it was put under that umbrella. It was made by a lot of the same people who are now involved in Studio Ghibli. I
believe it is under the Studio Ghibli, because when I looked it up earlier on my anime list, it is under that label.
It is not like anything else they have ever put out. Sugar and I, as teachers, as professionals, we were discussing, at what point you might bring this into a classroom.
And my comparison was even to Schindler's List, because I was like, you'd have I think I watched it when I was sometime in high school, and I just don't know if I could bring it into class, honestly, because you'd be dealing with so many permission forms and everything. It's so draining, even as an adult, but somebody who is younger and it doesn't know how to, I can't even say how to deal with those emotions, because they're just things that hit you on a very deep level.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to have a whole couple days where the kids are just mortified.
See, and I'm the opposite way, where I think you.
And I do feel these stories need to be told, but I feel a lot of these things where I feel maybe when they're done school, they can visit this at a very honest level and just kind of absorb it. Whereas in school, you're dealing with people who, especially, for example, myself, if I had watched this in school, especially when I watched Schindler's List, it's a little bit different for this than Schindler's List, because my grandfather was in the Second World War, and to kind of understand the impact of what's been going on both sides, I think it would have still made me deeply upset.
Oh yeah.
Because it's understanding, you're always told that point of history of you're doing the right thing, but then you understand what the quote unquote right thing is and what that means to other people, and that it might not have been the right thing. It obviously wasn't the right thing, and that's why it's so anti.
It was the thing that had to be done, and you are told that it was the right thing.
You're told that it's the right thing that has to be done.
Because it makes it more palatable.
And that's the thing. You're dealing with... you're just kind of understanding the dynamic of war and why it is such an anti-war movie, because you see, like, no matter who's involved, nobody wins. It's just the fact of, long story short, like, if I can say it this way, it's kind of like a pissing contest between people, groups of people, and everyone else around the outside are the people that suffer. And so, again, this is for a mature audience. I would never recommend it to somebody who's younger.
Don't sit your niece or nephew down or your younger sibling down until late teens, 16.
Later for me. I would say later.
I think Jeff thinks 16.
Jeff thinks Sugar thinks older.
But yeah,
it will destroy.
You'll cry. I can't think of a single person who could watch this and not be affected on it on a very strong.
So I was like even trying to be tight-lipped the whole time, and it was just like everything. It was like it was so good at like climaxing to the point of like what the story's point was, and then when you think, okay, I got the point of the story, then you realize there was another story going on and it's even worse, and you're like, oh my god, I can't handle this on my soul.
And the interesting thing that you told me about it was it hit for me immediately with how powerful it was.
Yeah.
And you said, like, there is that, it's a sad story, so there's the sad part's you're gonna cry about. And then, like, it stuck with you for days afterwards. Where you would think about it, and you would start to feel that emotion again.
Yeah, like, I'm one of those people that's, I don't know how to explain my personality, but I'm very, I guess, apathetic.
No, not apathetic. Empathetic?
Empathetic. No, I mean apathetic in the sense of people who, like, talk about auras and stuff, but empathetic, too. In the sense of, like...
Well, being apathetic means you don't care.
No, but what's the word I'm thinking about? It's something relating to auras, but anyways, let's just say empathetic. And watching this show, it's going to drive me nuts what that word is now. I'm going to have to look it up later. But anyways, watching this show, like, Jeff, I had a hard time watching it at the time. And I was kind of like, I'm usually pretty stoic, like funerals, anything, whatever. But, like, after finishing the show, for days after, it was almost like somebody had died that I'd known, because like for days after I couldn't stop thinking about it and like the deeper meaning of the show and just the impact and the fact that the story probably did happen for several people. I shouldn't say several people, lots of people.
Thousands.
And just that fact of just like, wow, like it's just that daunting feeling of just loss. And it's just, it clung to me. And I've talked to lots of other people that were like, man, I had to have, like, hot showers all week because I couldn't get rid of it. But it's like, it's not to get rid of it in a bad way, but in the sense that it's just, it hits your soul on another level of just being, like, so honest and sad. And it's just that, it's the best way. It makes you somewhat depressed, and it makes you just really sad. That's true. So anyways, that was, I lost track now. That was my number 4, right?
Yes, you're number 4, my number 1.
Okay, so did you do your number 4?
Yeah, I did my number 4. That was Silent Voice.
Okay, that was my number 3. So then what's your number 3?
My number 3, and this is the other one that you will get in trouble with certain people because you haven't seen it yet. And part of that is because I want you to see the live-action version first.
Yes.
And that would be Ghost in the Shell.
Yes, to make that very clear, I haven't avoided watching it. It was the fact I planned to watch it, and then once Jeff found out the live-action movie was coming out, he thought it would be an interesting aspect for me to watch that, then the anime. So literally, the movie's sitting on top of our TV as we speak. I'll probably watch it this next week, and then I'll watch the anime, and then we'll have a chitty chat, I'm sure. So that's the only reason I'm not avoiding it.
No, and that's fine. It's another one that is put into that same category as Akira, where it just kind of pushed the medium forward, and it showed you what you can do with animation and with anime that is very difficult to do in live action. And there's a reason why a Ghost in the Shell live action film, beyond it being a film that is exceptionally difficult to even conceptualize as being a live action film in the first place. That's why it's taken 25 to 30 years for there to be a version, is because simply the technology to showcase what the anime didn't exist. Some of those elements are in, again, something like The Matrix, where the idea behind Ghost in the Shell, the reason why I have it at number 3, it's deeply philosophical. It is very in-depth. It kind of begs for multiple viewings to understand everything that it's trying to say. It is an institution in anime, I feel like, and it dives into the depths of what it means to be human and how the world will change when we get to that point that we create artificial intelligence that also essentially we will get to a point where artificial intelligence and humanity are basically going to be one and the same.
Okay.
And what that world is going to look like, what is the place of humans in that world, what is the place of AI in that world, are we all just one and the same at that point?
Right.
And I know you've watched some other anime that kind of delve into that. No doubt they have been influenced by Ghost in the Shell. Anything that kind of looks at a future world where this sort of thing is happening has been influenced by Ghost in the Shell, because it is just, again, it's another one I give a 10. It is phenomenal. You get something different every single time you watch it. Visually speaking, it is stunning. It is performed exceptionally well by the English cast as well as the Japanese cast. And it is... I can understand why it didn't click for some people.
Okay.
Because of how philosophical it is and how it takes the time to kind of explain a lot of what's going on and like why it's a slower burn.
Okay.
In terms of what it's trying to do, because it necessarily has to be in order for the movie to kind of tell its point about, you know, what are the differences between humanity and AI at this point, and are we going to use AI to just further ourselves or not? And it's absolutely phenomenal. It is just fantastic. I can't think of another movie. Every single other movie that I have given a 10 to, I could honestly say you could probably watch it once, and that would be enough. Grave of the Fireflies, you can watch it once. I don't know how much better it gets on repeated viewings.
It gets more soul crushing.
Silent Voice, again, I feel like...
I mean, there's lots I'd say on a repeat, more so, not on the message, but in the sense that there are a lot of dream sequences, there are a lot of symbolism, pillow shots, things like that. But as for the message itself, it's very clear.
Perfect Blue, again, you can do multiple viewings, and you should in order to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yes.
Ghost in the Shell, I watched it the first time, and half of it I was like, I don't know if I understood the philosophy behind it. I don't know if I understood what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was communicated to me. And then I had to watch it a second time, and I was, oh my goodness, like so many elements that I'd missed out on. I've watched it probably like 4 or 5 times now, and when I watch it with you, I'm going to get an entirely different experience again. Very few films can ever do that, regardless of if they're anime or if they are, you know, if they're Western animation, if they're live action. Very few films will continue to give you a different experience every single time you watch it. So
I gotcha.
Ghost in the Shell is one of those few that can definitely do it.
Well, I'm excited to watch it because I've heard nothing but good things, really. Anybody I talk to is like, what have you watched for movies? Ghost in the Shell! Ghost in the Shell!
It's the big... I would argue there's a big 3 when it comes to late 80s into
Akira,
the 90s.
Ghost in the Shell, and...
I'd say Ninja Scroll.
I was about to say, Ninja Scroll is kind of... for a lot of people, yes. But I find there's also kind of like, I wouldn't say niche, but there's a lot of people that really like it. But then I think a lot of people would argue for a lot of Ghibli stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of a...
I mean, Spirit, if you want to talk, you know, all-encompassing, Spirited Away.
Yeah. That would honestly, I think right away they'd be like Spirited Away, Mononoke, Nausicaa. Not even Nausicaa necessarily, but everyone loves Mononoke. So I think that would be right away the first ones that people would be like, blah.
Blah.
Blah. But I hope to goodness, like, I usually watch anime first, then the live action of whatever, because if it's anything like what Death Note was, holy smokes.
It's not going to be that bad. If anything, from what I've heard, because I haven't watched the live action either, because I want to experience that.
Okay.
I want us to basically have the inverse thing. So, from what I have heard, a lot of people have basically said they don't know why the live action was made, because it is fairly faithful, though truncated in its vision of what it wanted to say.
Okay.
So
Something
that's
to
what
look
I've
forward
heard
to.
in reviews, and it's part of the reason why maybe it didn't hit so well in theatrical release is because the early buzz was basically like you could just watch the original and you would get the better version of this.
Right.
You know, and sometimes the adaptation, that's what it does, and that's part of the reason why lots of people said, I don't think that you need an adaptation, because I don't think turning it into a live action really benefits it at all. I would say probably the performance of Scarlett Johansson will be interesting to see, and because the whole crux of the movie is based on the performance, her performance of that character.
Right.
And it's another movie where the performance of one character is so integral to everything. It either clicks or it doesn't based on that performance.
Right. Well, obviously the whole show kind of stands on her performance, so I guess we'll see. It's hard for me to say anything right now. I'm looking forward to it, if not the live action, the anime at the very least from what I've heard. And I find it ironic because my number 2, if that's all right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
My number 2 is Time of Eve. And I don't mean the anime, I mean the movie. And I say it's a little bit of a cheat because the movie is what the anime was, plus a little more information, especially in the end, about some of the characters we're dealing with in the anime. And I find it ironic that they're so close together in our rankings because it also deals with AI. It deals with androids, and it's basically about humans, many years from now, obviously, living with androids. And the fact that, for example, our main character has an android, and it keeps kind of disappearing, and they don't know where it's going. So they find out it's going to this cafe. And this cafe has the rule about basically no discrimination. And that if people are robots or androids, you can't ask them, you can't badger them, you just are what you are. And I guess I place this so high because I know it's not highly rated on MAL, so to speak, as some of the other movies we've mentioned, but I find it deals with the idea of what AI really means, living with technology, and if we can come to terms with the fact of treating them equally, if it would just be a sense of demeaning and slavery, if we can place ourselves in someone else's perspective and kind of acknowledging our fear that we have of AI. And I find that a lot of people and androids come into this cafe and we get kind of their story, and I find they're so lovely in the way that stories are told. We have an understanding of how these androids feel and how humans feel, and I find it's a very lovely story.
Sounds like it hits on a lot of similar in maybe not in tone, but just in what they're trying to get across.
Right.
Because Ghost in the Shell is very definitely kind of a darker, more almost, I would say, realistic in the terms of what would probably happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas this, I haven't seen this movie. I could see there being room perhaps for a more optimistic outlook on things, maybe from how you've described it. Mm-hmm. Optimism is not one of the words that I would choose for Ghost in the Shell on the whole. So
I won't give anything away, but it's kind of that fact of near the end of some characters that you understand that don't have any bias and want this equality for both androids and humans. And we have people that just can't see that perspective, and other ones that are trying to understand how everything can fit into the bigger picture, so to speak. I don't want to give anything away. I find it's a very lovely story, and kind of even if it wasn't AI, understanding someone else's perspective and not being so biased and judgmental. I love it. It's very good. And I think that's
all of our top 10.
I was about to say, I think, because it's canceled out your number 2 was
Perfect Blue.
Perfect Blue. My number 1 was Nausicaa, and yours was Grave of the Fireflies, number 1, right? Yeah, so we've kind of run out there. So
I would say, just as an interesting wrap-up, I found that all of my picks were individual stories. They didn't have any sort of tie-in to... I mean... There is and continues to be Ghost in the Shell series that have been made, but for almost all the rest of mine, they haven't ever really had any sort of series built in. They weren't part of a series before. And it's interesting as I was looking through my list, and I did rate fairly highly some movies that were based or offshoots of television series.
Right.
There's a few Dragon Ball Z movies that I really appreciated. There's a few of the Pokemon movies that I really appreciated. Like my two honorable mentions were both within that category, but that's part of the reason why I think I put them only as an honorable mention, whereas I have, technically speaking, the movie of Digimon Tri Part 3,
right?
Which was
they're
extremely
kind of
powerful.
episodes. They're kind of it's marked as a movie.
And the Cowboy Bebop movie I also had as an honorable mention. Both of those I rated as a 9. But I find it interesting that as we were discussing kind of our list of like, well, here are some things that were fun. A lot of movies that I didn't put as high on my list were all offshoots from anime series.
Right. And I think I mentioned, Castle in the Sky was my honorable mention, and one that it kind of is in my honorable mention is Garden of Words. And I know you haven't seen it, and it's basically things I do and don't like about it. Really, the only part I don't like about it is kind of the romantic inclination in the show, because there's such an age difference in our main characters. But the thing that I liked about it is understanding that in different points in life you can be lonely and understand that you don't really know what you're going to do with your life, and kind of trying to find that level of fulfillment, and just in simple words and in the way of setting. The art is so beautiful in it. I really like that. But sorry, that's just kind of an honorable mention. But I know also Jeff and I were talking beforehand kind of about the podcast and so forth, and I found something interesting where Jeff said, "Oh, how would you say they're different from like our favorite Disney movies?" And I was like, well, I said I find it kind of odd and yet kind of telling for a lot of these things, where a lot of Disney movies have been kind of retold so many times that we've kind of just come to terms with them, like Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, like any of them really. You're like, oh yeah, it's been told so many times. They're fairy tales, and they're things that they do have a lesson, but it's been changed so many times you can get different meanings out of it. Whereas, a lot of anime is very much like a concise story and a concise message. And it's done in such an eloquent way a lot of the time, especially the higher quality movies.
And I mean, I couldn't think of a single, and I'm sure they exist. I haven't watched them, like anime musicals. Because so much of what I like about Disney is the musicals, and not to say that music isn't important in an anime. Of course it is. It's part of the reason why I had Yuri on Ice and Your Lie in April so high up my list. But I mean,
I don't think I honestly watched like
they aren't inherently musicals,
Right.
So, and a lot of what's important to me in a Disney film is the music. Not so much Pixar, because Pixar doesn't do a lot of musicals, but I just find it interesting that typically with Disney in particular, it's more about comedy. Not to say that they don't have important messages to be said. Zootopia...
But they try and make it more palatable for all ages by having that comedy in there and being like, it's
and
not
they
as
are
cripplingly sad.
They're definitely more aimed for kids.
Yes.
And I feel sometimes anime...
That's a misconception, is the fact that a lot of people think anime is solely for kids. Obviously, yes, there is a ton of anime that's meant for kids. I watched a ton when I was a kid. But it's also the fact that it teaches and hits on a lot of topics that are very strong. And like, for example, Grave of the Fireflies. It's very deep and honest, and it's very thick. Like, it is deep as can be. And I find that a lot of people misunderstand that animation automatically means less quality. But I find that's just a perception of what we've seen on television. In a way, it's another kind of podcast, but in a sense that, the things that have put little or less effort in are usually in an animated form here in Canada, so to speak. It hasn't been to the last few years where it's been like, oh, that's really good. That has a very adult meaning. Like, don't get me wrong, in the 90s there was well-written animation shows, so to speak, that people were really fond of. But it's more in the last couple years where you get things that are clever writing in animation, like Rick and Morty. I know it's not anime, but it's animation here.
Yeah.
And it hits on very adult themes and very honest and thought-provoking. And you get that with a lot of other animation now, whereas before it was very much like anybody who thought of animation was The Simpsons. And it's like, it's meant to be kind of family, it's kind of a joke on family, it's not supposed to get too deep. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people that don't understand anime. So.
Yeah. And, it's I find it really interesting. The other thing that I was thinking about as we were talking about these is I feel anime in particular does a much better job of segmenting who their target audience is. As we've talked about, there are anime that are definitely made with young kids in mind. I'd probably say something like Cheese Home.
Yeah.
It's probably targeted for a younger audience.
Yeah.
You don't see, with animation in North America, you don't see an age category for, like, let's say 11 to 15. Like, that age category isn't really considered very much. It's just assumed, well, they either like animation or they don't.
Yeah.
Whereas the Japanese market definitely hits on that really hard, and they recognize that, like, animation is for everybody, and you can target specific audiences with it. It isn't just, adults happen to like Disney films sometimes, so,
yeah, it's bearable to watch when you're there with kids. It's like, okay, we're making progress. Whereas, like, I think that's why the last few years especially, everywhere is likely different, but I find here in Canada especially, we see more people getting into anime because whereas some things, like animation-wise here in the U.S., Canada, you name it, North America, that, thank you, where was I going now? Shoot.
We were talking
totally
about
lost track.
Segmenting the audience, and that the Japanese market seems to delineate between young children and then, the teeny boppers and then into the teen
anyways,
years.
I think I had an idea of where I was going. Was basically the last few years we've seen more people where if you give someone an animation show, it's very segmented or divisive, on who does and doesn't like it, and it's kind of everyone kind of is lost in the sense of animation here in North America, whereas I find a lot of people now are getting very much into cosplay and anime and all those things now because it's like there is legitimately something for everybody, and it's becoming much more accessible where people are finding that niche of what they really like. Like, it can get so specific. Like, a friend and I were looking through stuff the other day. It's like, okay, I want shonen, but I don't want this kind of shonen. I want this and this and this, and you can go through like a whole like search engine of stuff. And it'll all be there. Like, if there's something that scratches your itch, it will be there. Whereas something in animation, like now you're like, I want something that's really, really witty writing and has this and this and this. You're like, well, it's kind of like sounds like this, maybe, but like go in any chat room, Reddit, you name it. Like, I've been on there and somebody's like, I like this kind of anime, but I also kind of like this aspect too. Is there anything like it? And people just start spewing. Like, there's always something. And I find there's a comfort in knowing that there's something that's always up your alley. You know what I mean?
And it's the same thing with, we were talking about, we made a podcast earlier about introducing anime to those who aren't involved. And even, if people list, I want, I like Game of Thrones, what would you recommend in terms of anime?
Right.
You can have a recommendation.
Yeah.
I don't know of any Western animated shows that would scratch the same itch.
Yeah, I would like
Game
a
of
space
Thrones.
Western where, like,
Yeah.
it's like, I'd like another space one, or, like, we were talking about, we actually watched Good Mythical Morning today, and they were talking about Space Dandy, and it's just like, even trying to explain the key things of Space Dandy, where it's like, yep, that's up your alley, you'll love it. Like, it's just so many things that are so unique to each kind of anime, where it's like, I can't remember how we got into the topic the other day. A friend of mine was talking about, like, basically verbatim spitting out, like, something like Kill la Kill, and I was like, bam, there you go, you'll love it. And just having that so much diversity in anime that it always brings somebody new in, and I find that's where before it was kind of, we talked about this on another podcast as well, of it just being seen as nerd culture or growing up and all this other things, where now people are getting into it where they find this kind of sense of belonging, and it's easy to hop on board when you love something so much. Like, yeah, it's characters, series, movies. There's always something to get on board with anime, in my opinion. So
yeah, that's
why it's hard not to love.
Yeah, that's what I think is, we've been, at least I can say I've been conditioned, and through now 30 plus years of seeing what North America churns out in terms of animation, there's what Disney does, there's what Pixar does, there's DreamWorks, and all of them work in a similar fashion. And then if you're going for an adult audience or even an older audience, it tends to be, oh, well, this is what The Simpsons did, this is what Family Guy did, this is what American Dad did, Bob's Burgers. And so those hit two very different age categories and very different ideas. Anime doesn't have that that bridge to cross anymore. They've made stuff for everybody.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why Avatar: The Last Airbender was as phenomenal as it was is I felt like its target audience was essentially like 10 to 20.
Yeah.
And it's something that
kids loved it, adults loved it.
And it's something that Western animation doesn't tend to do.
Right.
And there's a reason why a few of those have now cropped up and have done exceptionally well. Steven Universe hits that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Gravity Falls in a lot of ways.
That was really good.
Hits that age category. A lot of anime does too. And that's where I feel is the reason why anime might always have a little bit more universal appeal.
Yeah. It will always have universal appeal. I'm just glad that now, here anyways, that the last few years it's really been increasing. Because like Anime Con wasn't even a thing here really until the last 3 years ago. I'll say that. I would say
within the last 5, though.
Ish.
It
got
our expo.
to big.
Yeah, our expo was about everything sort of nerd culture, and we just now.
Then it started separating, and it's become all these different things. But, anyways, we kind of went on a tangent again, our specialty. But if you have any questions, thoughts, we'd appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. It's evening for us right now, but anytime it is for you. Thank you for joining me, Jeff.
Yeah, no problem. Always watch Grave of the Fireflies, please. The more word of mouth it gets, the better, because it boggles my mind how many people have never even heard of it before.
True. There's so many really wonderful anime that is not on the radar for a lot of people. And maybe we'll have a podcast about that, like extremely well-written anime that is not on anyone's radar. And if it is, it's a fewer. Anywho, thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, we'll see you later.